that I never, or I don't really have shows. I'm like not like that guy.
Yeah.
Lauren wants to have herself a show all the time, but I hate it because generally they never end. It's like, stop making the same mistake. So my favorite / least favorite example is Walking Dead. I love the premise. Anything apocalyptic, I'm there. I want to live in that time. I know my family's going to die and I'll be by myself with some guns. And that's fine. I get that. That's my life. Well, anyway, but the freaking Walking Dead folks, they do the same thing. They trust somebody, they get eaten. They trust somebody, they get eaten. And then they've just done that for 20 years now. So that's why I don't like a show. But Yellowstone, though, also similar. I feel like, first of all, it's going to end way before 20 dead seasons, but it's just good, dude.
And admittedly, whenever it ends, it'll be too soon for me.
Yeah.
I love
it's
it.
So
I love
great.
the show.
Yeah.
My wife's like yours. She's always got to have a show.
Yeah.
And it's not just a show. She has like 10 shows she's watching at any given time. And I'm much more of a stand outside with a beverage at night kind of guy.
Yeah.
And so, but Yellowstone was the one that I was more than willing to binge on.
Yeah.
And be attached to.
Yeah.
See, here's where you compromise though, is you put a TV outside, a little comfy sitting area with a beverage in hand,
a tube TV
with the wife.
Yes.
But tube TV. Yeah, I mean, that's fair. It's probably something I need to do. I'm not going to try and argue it or anything like that.
No, it just makes sense. It's the kind of show you can't watch with your kids, though. That's the problem. They come running through the house. You got to watch it at like midnight.
Yeah,
so you got to wait till they're in bed.
Well, help me because I haven't seen
many F words.
Yeah,
I haven't seen Yellowstone. So kind of walk me through, the core of what it is and what it's about. I just know it's about some ranchers, some farmers. There's some killing involved. Lots of F words. The best type of killing.
Like not like just random gratuitous killing, but like they just.
Did you ever watch? Did you ever watch Sons of Anarchy?
Oh, abso-freaking-lutely, I did.
But not like I watched this.
No, in Sons of Anarchy, I felt like it started out really good the way Yellowstone is, and then towards the end, it got a little dark.
Yes,
it was like, okay, this is just gratuitous.
Yeah.
Violence and debauchery.
Yeah.
And so I don't feel like Yellowstone has gone there. But yeah, it's about a ranching family that is like, I don't know if you remember like way back in the day, the show Dallas.
Oh man, yeah, dude.
That might predate.
That's predating Parker.
I'm the young guy here, okay? I'm the young cat.
Well, I mean, Dallas was the show that my parents watched after I went to bed. And it was like, kids can't be up when Dallas is being played. And so, but it was like, really wealthy family and, a lot of political influence and social influence and all that kind of stuff. Yellowstone is that in Montana, and it's like, they're a ranching family, political influence, a lot of, mo money, mo problems kind of stuff that comes with it. And the story is based just outside of Bozeman. A lot of awesome Montana vibes.
Yes. That house is phenomenal.
Okay. So since we already clicked record and we're into this, John Mark,
we're here.
Welcome, man. Welcome to the
Thank
podcast.
You.
So glad that you're here.
Literally, dude, I was stalking your Instagram before this, and I was like, why am I getting invited to this? I don't know, but I'm glad to be here.
Well, I would, because you're probably stalking Sweb's Instagram, and that's what I ask myself a lot too. I'm like, why would he do this with me? Like what on earth?
No, for real. The number of times that Sweb like shouts me out or something and like gives me credit, and I'm just sitting here thinking like, dude, you know a lot of really smart people. Why am I always? Why do you?
And you're on that list, man. You're on that list.
I genuinely don't get it. So,
well, we're gonna find that out today. Today is the day, and if you suck today, then I guess we'll We'll just reverse that. Yeah. I was like, you're right. Sweb's an idiot. You're right.
I'm okay with it. I'll just stay up here in Montana.
That's right. Do your Montana stuff.
Okay. So Sweb, you just said, do your Montana stuff. And John Mark, you just said, I'll do the Montana thing. All right. Help me, for someone that's never been to Montana. What does that mean when I just I'm just gonna do my Montana thing.
Do my Montana thing.
I honestly, I don't know what it means for Sweb. And I don't know that I've ever formulated this and really made it official, but I guess what I was thinking when I said that was I'm just gonna go back and be doing my thing, and if nobody knows me or cares about me, that's okay.
Yeah.
And that is a little bit of a Montana thing. Like, hey, we're just up here, and if everybody else can just go on thinking where they live is great, and not knowing really where Montana is, we're good with that. We're joking about Yellowstone, and it's like that's an amazing show, but we also Montanans kind of don't like it because it makes everybody want to come to Montana.
Right. That's true.
So
see, I like that about you. See, that's part of my thing with you too. Is like I think it was yesterday. Me and Parker were having lunch. He's like, "So tell me about John Mark." I was like, "Well, he's a dude who literally built his house with his own two hands with nails and hammers, and instead of taking out the trash, he just goes to the fire pit and throws it over there or something. It's just like this mountain man kind of guy. Doesn't want anybody to mess with him, but he's also kind of a BA and he knows kind of how to do stuff. And so I don't know, but that does kind of have that Montana vibe too. And it's kind of like a cousin to Texas. I feel like we have a little bit of that here. Y'all are more rugged because you've somehow been able to keep everybody out, which is great.
No, for sure. Texas is sort of like a big brother to Montana, and not just in size, but predating and all that kind of stuff. And the attitude, not exactly the same. There's some similarities for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the connection. I wish they were closer to each other so I could make it visit a little bit more.
And I'm not saying my attitude is necessarily one that I would espouse to prescribe to anyone.
Right, yeah.
I tend, not proudly, I tend to be a little bit too much like, if you don't like me, I don't care. And a little bit too much of the, I don't really want to go out and meet more people and make more friends and all that. And again, I'm not saying I'm right in that, but that's where I tend to be a little bit.
Well, so that seems like a good way for us or for me to intro why I like you and have you on here, and we're just friends in general. And so I'll give you a couple of things that I think. Again, part of this is just to catch Parker up, and then if we happen to have a listener or two out there, then they can catch up as well. So I'm similar to that. I mean, I don't think that the world could use a lot more of me. I think if by myself, I'm doing a few more things that help some people, but can you imagine having a room of 30 of me? And I feel like you and I are similar in that regard.
Right.
So, and I've always appreciated that about you, is just honest feedback. Here's what I think about it. If you don't like it, that's okay. I got other stuff to do, but not in a flippant, like I hate you kind of way. It was just like, you're the guy that's like, I'm going to give you wisdom that you asked for, but then I got stuff to do because my life is revolving around the things that I'm doing, that God told me to do, that I'm blessed to and privileged to be responsible for. In your case, a large family and things that you do there, which obviously we'll get into. So I'm related to that. I can relate to that, because Parker, on the other hand, Parker's the guy that everyone wants more of. Parker is the lovable, huggable. Like, we hugged yesterday, as a matter of fact, and I haven't changed, taken a shower since then, because I just wanted to stay in it. So Parker's that guy.
Does he smell good?
He does, always.
Okay.
It's amazing. I don't know how he does it.
Just a natural musk,
Musk. That's the word.
My wife called me out for my musk the other day. It was like, dude, you need to fix that.
So fix your musk.
I don't have the Parker musk by any means.
And there's the title right there. Let me write that down. I don't have
musk. Trademark that.
I don't have the Parker musk. Oh my gosh.
Okay, I want to say a couple other things, and let's jump in. John Mark, you're going to have, by the way, I'm sorry, can we catch everybody up, even me? Are we calling you John Mark? But we don't call you John, right? You got to use the whole thing, right?
Well, I mean, it's, Yeah, it's like Billy Bob.
That's right. It only goes
John
one direction. That's
Yeah.
right. Okay. All right.
Right.
That's what I thought. That's how I explained it. But then again, I'm the guy that will be halfway through a conversation and realize, wait, I've been saying it wrong all along.
Well, I don't know what's showing up on everybody's screens, but when they watch this, but I've got John Mark, then I've got Parker Richardson, then I got Sweb. And Sweb's like Madonna.
Yeah, that's all you need.
No need for.
You don't need to spell it out. That's
I
all
only go by Parker Richardson. So if you just call me Parker,
Good.
I won't answer. If you
won't
just call me Richardson, I won't
love
answer. But John
okay.
Mark, like John just by itself just seems pretty flat. Mark by itself, pretty basic. Like John Mark, like that's solid.
All due respect to the Johns and the Marks.
All of them.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
That's good. They've done good things.
Yeah, they've done good things, but they need to change their name. Is what they need to do.
Other than that, yeah.
So.
No, they don't.
All right, so we're going to get into this thinkless conversation. I think we set you up at some point, John Mark, and said, "Hey, man, what do people not think about?" So we're going to get into that in just a second. But here's why I'm excited about it. Number one, because if for some reason I have forgotten to set you up on that, well, you're going to have a fine answer anyway. Which is again why I want you on here.
You did.
Good. Okay.
You did,
Good.
and it's been a minute, and so I almost texted you guys this morning, like, "Hey, can you remind me what I?"
No,
wrote?
man. We just rank it. Just go off.
I think
man.
I know.
No, this is gonna be great.
I think I remember.
But I also want to. You can give us your answer in just a second, and then you can throw in your bio along the way. But I'm excited about it because one, you are a pastor, which is one small title for a lot of different definitions. So you're that guy. I just casually threw out a minute ago that you built your own house with your own two hands, which is also a true story. I didn't throw out the fact that you raised some sort of Noah's Ark menagerie of animals and birds and things at your house, which I'm sure at some point you'll talk about. You've got a gaggle or a committee of children that somehow wander around this property. Of course, you live in the great state of Montana, so you have all of the regular outdoorsy part there. My favorite thing of all, of course, I'm saving it for the end, is that you also happen to have flown a jet fighter at one time or two in your life. And that's the thing, of course, I would just like to speak about and talk about the whole time. But I mean, dude, that's an interesting person right there. We went from pastor to farmer to like house builder to fighter pilot all at the same time, a little too fast. And so whatever your answer is to how people should think or need to think more about, it's going to be amazing because you've got 100 angles to come at it from. So that being said, let's jump into the thinkless question. And then you tell us all the amazing, most interesting man in the world things about you. So what do you think people are thinkless about?
Man, I love the way you, honestly, not in a self-promoting way, but I love the way you set that up because I think it actually, as I was thinking about this on my drive in this morning, it goes to several of the categories that I was thinking about. So I think this is not a fully formed hypothesis or thesis or whatever.
That's the best. That's the best way.
This is just me kind of what I've seen, and what I see is increasingly the case. But something that I think people are increasingly thinkless about is the benefit, value, and personal, the personal benefit of hard work and of doing something that's really, really hard.
Cool.
And that's not profound. But I just think anymore, you see somebody go and they have a hard week at work or they take on something hard, and all of a sudden it's like, man, I gotta take a week off. I gotta have a mental health day. I gotta reestablish my work home boundaries and all of this kind of stuff. And I'm not by any means advocating for unhealthy drive where you ignore your family or anything like that. But I feel like there's anymore just the underappreciation of the value of work. Not profound. But I come at that from the standpoint of what you said in the intro of having been a pilot, an officer first, and then a pilot in the Air Force. Going through pilot school, it's a 52-week long program where you are Monday through Friday, 12 on, 12 off. You figure out your studying it's like going through a graduate program. So you got to study outside your 12 on hours. And so you're studying and it's a given, you get Christmas and off and all that, but it's a given that for a year you're working, at the office 60-hour work weeks. Jeez. and nobody bats an eye at it.
Right.
And by the way, you're making like $24,000 a year, and nobody even blinks. Wow. And nobody questions it. And nobody's like, oh man, this is, I don't know if I can do this or anything like that. And I think that really set me up well. And then as I've grown and done different things, I've thought back to when I was a kid with my grandfather, who was different things. He was a pastor at a church in South Carolina, but he also did things like build his own house with his two hands and cut down trees and cut firewood. And as a kid, I'd go and help him. And every time we'd pray before we started, and he'd say, "Lord, thank you for the ability to work." Yeah, and that cool. That came back to me in recent years. As something, Ecclesiastes talks about, if a man is able to enjoy the work of his hands, that's a gift from God. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that's just all of that kind of rumbled together. That's sort of my answer.
Well, I mean, you kind of spoke to it too, or alluded to the fact, like you had a grandpa that kind of instilled maybe some of these things, some of these values, this work ethic in you. Because I always like to ask the question, like, where did that begin? Is it a generational thing, where maybe if you're 40 or above, you just kind of like born or around or surrounded kind of with this instinctual, like, no, we work for the things that we have. And now where we have maybe, teenagers or everybody that's 25 and under or 30 and under, whatever, in our current society and culture and where we are, where they're like, man, I don't like to work. And now my debt is just my student debt's just paid off. And that's the way I like it. You know what I'm saying? So kind of like walk us through a little bit.
And we're facing a labor shortage nationwide, right. In every area,
So walk us through kind of where that was really instilled. Right. In you and how that formed and how that was curated.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a combination of having it modeled growing up, but then, and this goes to my other thing, having the privilege of getting to go through something that was really, really hard. Cool. And that was that it going through and whatever that is for somebody else. Not everybody can go through Air Force flight school and pilot training, but I'm really grateful for having gone through something that was so formative and so hard at an early point in my adulthood, so that everything after that wasn't scary. And so so it was. It doesn't mean that, now for the rest of my life, I'm going to work 60 to 80-hour work weeks, and by any means. But I think going through something, and that's my other thing, is not the people are thankless about the value of work, but also about the value of going through something that's really, really hard. That's good. Yeah. From a work standpoint. And so once you've gone through something like that, whether it's getting your master's or going to a grad school or going through some sort of a certification program or getting your instrument rating or, whatever it is, once you've done that or put on a big event that you were in way over your head, like whatever it is, to not look back on that as like, oh my gosh, that was the worst thing. I never want to do that again. But look at it as like, man, that was a really good thing to have gone through. So it's the combination, I think, of having had that demonstrated. And so I think that would be my encouragement, is like, if you didn't grow up with that having been demonstrated or instilled at a young age, I really think the bigger part was having gone through something really hard at a formative season.
So that makes sense to me. And I haven't done I wouldn't say as hard of something like the flight school you went through, but that resonates with me of, like you said, having had to do it. course, we're on this side speaking in hindsight of hard things, right? But I wonder, because I want to stick on this just a little bit more and pull something out of you here. Hopefully you have a couple of these practical thoughts, but like when you come up against something hard, and I don't know what your next hard thing is, John Mark. And some people do. Some people know, hey, grad school's coming. You know, boot camp is 6 weeks away. You know, people know. Is there like a question you ask? Is there a thing you go, okay, you know what, I'm gonna have to sleep a little bit more every night this week. You know what, I tell you what, I'm fasting from carbs and sugar this week, so I don't wake up in a bad mood tomorrow. Like, are there things, and those are physical, but I'm saying maybe there's a mental thing. Is there a checklist that you important. Do? Very important. You're right.
Yeah, I mean, and I even credit you a little bit. I didn't stick with the full keto thing, but man, I got to a point in life where it was like, man, I can't keep eating cheeseburgers and feel good. Yeah. And so getting good sleep and eating well, man, that's huge. Yeah. But I kind of stumbled on that by accident. Mm-hmm. I think, you know, we just came off of, as a church, doing a student conference that was swinging way above our weight class, mm-hmm. biting off way more than we probably should. Mm-hmm. And yet that's a little bit of how we operate. And I was given the responsibility of kind of running point on it. And it was our first time doing it. And kind of to your point, you know, is a little bit of like, okay, holy crap, I'm about to go into something really hard. Right. And it's about to be a season of just living this. Right. And I think part of it is I don't necessarily have like a formed checklist or mental checklist or anything like that, but I do have a moment of just kind of internally saying, okay, we're about to go into this. Mm-hmm. and I do have a kind of some conversations with my wife and just let her know, hey, this is going to be a season, and doesn't mean that I'm going to be absentee. It just means that we're going to need to be a little bit more intentional with the times that we do have together. Doesn't mean I'm going to be working, you know, for the next 9 months that I'm going to be working 80-hour work weeks or anything like that. Mm-hmm. It just means that there's going to be times, and I think that's the thing that I've learned is there's going to be days or there's going to be times where, you know, you'll be in bed before I get home. Right. And there's going to be days or times where I'm not going to be at home for dinner. It's not going to be a regular thing. But and for me to not look at that with a sense of dread. Yeah. I think that's the big thing, is to not be like, oh man, and that goes back to the thing with my grandfather. Mm-hmm. That it was almost like God put that on my heart in the last couple of years and reminded me. I had not thought about that in decades, mm-hmm. and reminded me of my grandfather thanking God for the ability to work. And so again, that's if there's a mental checklist, that's it. It's like, okay, God, thank you. Yeah. You know, that this is not a bad thing, something to be scared of.
So, okay. So I want to keep going still. This is real helpful to me, man. So, we were at your house, you know, a couple of years ago now, I guess on a vacation, a perfectly timed transition, we can also say too at that point. But we were there, and I want to let me back up and say I'm taking this question now to how you put this into your family, into your kids. They're and you can tell us their ages and stuff in just a second, but they're not at the age to ready to go to boot camp. So their heart is different than your heart and my heart, right? But sure. But I remember, so when we were there, my daughter is, you know, pretty diva-ish, and wouldn't be the person that just really enjoys all the hard things if you were to prescribe it. But simply putting her in a different atmosphere alongside your daughter, the two of them together felt a little like a tornado or typhoon of sorts. They go out, they hatch a baby bird a little too early, and we'll maybe share the rest of that story in a minute. My daughter's out there literally milking a goat, which I never saw her standing within like 10 feet of a goat. And here she is over there just tugging away, milking a goat, just simply because she was in proximity to somebody else who had essentially, I'm going to use the phrase like recalibrated hard. And so I'm just wondering, are your kids and your family, going to be better at this simply because they're in a place where they can kind of run and free and do that kind of stuff on the acreage out there? Or is there something that you're putting into your kids that I can take and put them into my city, Austin, Texas kids? Like, make me a better dad in this regard, because this is a really cool topic that's going to be helpful for both me and Parker as we raise young kids.
Yeah, I mean, I feel very, very fortunate. My parents in the early 90s bought land in Montana before the TV show Yellowstone, and before I think back then, honestly, the movie that had just come out was Dances with Wolves. And that was like the big Kevin. Incidentally, Kevin Costner.
That's right.
In Montana, very young Kevin Costner, and so everybody had seen Dances with Wolves. We were living in suburban Atlanta, and so, you know, to your point, like, I grew up as a kid and teenager in suburban Atlanta, in Metro Atlanta, and so, but my dad was he is to this day in ministry, on staff with Campus Crusade for Christ since the early 80s.
Wow.
And yet he was just very good with his hands, and he was a hard worker. He had that instilled. He had me as my job from the time that I was able to. He had me going to my neighbors and pushing the lawnmower and mowing lawns. I hated it then.
Right.
I think that's helpful to know that, like, you know, your kids aren't going to love it, like, you know, right away. I hated it, but I liked the money that I made. And my dad was always doing little home remodels or building a deck on the back of the house or whatever. And so I had to go help him on Saturdays, and he'd drag me out of bed early, and I hated that with every ounce of my being. And so I think I'm very fortunate now to be where I am, because my parents bought land in the early 90s, and then we were able to buy some acres from them and build a house on it. And now my kids are growing up in that. But I don't think you have to have a spot in the woods where you have goats and chickens and all that to be able to have your kids exposed to those sorts of things. And, you know, maybe you don't have the ability to go and build something, you know, or do a remodel on your house. Sweb, I know you do. But, you know, I don't know, whatever it is, that it could be something as simple as, you know, taking your kids hiking, and kids have infinitely more energy than us, and yet they will complain way more about going on a hike. And they're so tired. And it's like, you just ran nonstop with your friends, you know, for 4 straight hours, and now you're tired. So, you know, I think exposing your kids to things, whatever it is good.
Yeah. That's really.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, it's just and it doesn't mean that, you know, my kids necessarily have farm chores or whatever. I mean, their ages are 3, 8, 11, 13, 19, and 20. We've done, and they're all through foster care adoption. So
also a hard thing. I would love to hear about that hardness too in just a second.
Yeah.
And honestly, that didn't even cross my mind. As
of course.
One of the things.
And that's the thing. I love that.
And well, and I think that is important. Is like, you know, we've gone through some, you know, I mean, foster care in and of itself is not easy. And then when you provide foster care and a home and adoption for, you know, not just a baby, but we have brought in a couple of teen girls who had just really hard life experiences, and just this world has a very ugly side, and it was very hard for the two of them, and everything that they experienced we brought into our own lives, and experienced the impact of that, and people on the outside look at that and are like, oh my gosh, like, how are you guys even still standing? And to be fair, we're still in some regards dealing with it. But I don't somehow, you know, as a young kid, I was in a youth group, and we memorized chapter 1 of James, and consider it pure joy, my brothers, when you face trials of many kinds, because the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Like that always just stuck with me.
Yeah.
And so to this day, I don't come out of something hard feeling like, oh, I'm so spent and depleted and defeated. And it's just like, God made me a little bit stronger.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's
so
great.
Maybe kind of pivoting for a second, because as you have, gone through hard things, you've had this perspective, you've adjusted your perspective, you've given gratitude and thankfulness, for the hard things. How are you able to maybe show grace or extend extend a level of like care towards people who maybe just have a very, very shallow idea, definition, thought towards something that's hard? Because I'm putting that in my perspective of like, man, there's some hard things I've walked through, and there's a level of scrappiness that I've just kind of developed along the way, and a hard work ethic because I've had to. Nothing was really given to me. I kind of had to work for everything, that I had. And now whenever I hear from people that are either close to me or not so close to me, whatever, and they're like, oh, this is so hard. And I'm like, bro, you don't even know. You know what I'm saying? So how do help me here? Because sometimes it's hard for me.
Yeah.
Same. I mean, sometimes it's or a lot of times it's very easy. It's like with my kids, you can just kind of laugh at it, and yet, like, sometimes I tend to probably one of my biggest things that I have to work on continually is my temper with my kids, for not, whether it's not doing something or not taking care of something or whatever. That's as somebody who tends more towards hard work and perfectionist and all of that, it's my kids sometimes carry the brunt of that. And so it's a constant fight, not only with my kids to show grace to them, to your question of how do you show grace? It's like, well, practice it. It's hard, but yeah, do it. And so to show grace to them and to show grace to, as a leader in an organization that has a lot of young people working in the organization, to also show grace there, and to not let my frustration or eye roll at, they're like, oh my gosh, last week was so hard, now I need 2 days off. It's like, okay, all right,
yeah.
And so and I work with a couple of guys who are similar, more like us in terms of age and mindset and all of that. And I think it's helpful to have somebody that is more like-minded with you, that you can kind of roll your eyes together, not in a gossipy way, but just kind of like, okay, we're gonna you have to laugh about it,
right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, not give a free pass on, like, do your best to try, and if, like you say, you didn't benefit from having it instilled in you. And I think, and you developed it after having gone through some things. So I think the people that you have influence over, taking the time after having gone through those hard things or ahead of going through those hard things, like Sweb was saying, what's the mental checklist, ahead of it, going into it, the people that you're leading or having influence over, giving them kind of the pep talk ahead of time, like, hey, this is going to be hard. It's not going to kill you. You're not going to die. It's actually going to make you a little bit better. And just know that going into it.
Yeah.
And then on the back end of it, kind of circling back and say, hey, remember where I said it wasn't going to kill you? That it didn't. We're on the back side of it. Giving a little bit of that balance and grace of like, okay, yep, you take some time off. You reorient your work-life balance. Take your mental health day. I'm hot take. I'm sorry. I'm not disparaging people who want to take a mental health day or anything like that. That's a real thing, for sure. So it's just finding that balance of, like, hey, it didn't kill you.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to take the entire week off. You can actually come back to work again, and we'll be okay. But having that balance.
Man. Okay, Parker, I got to switch gears and ask him some other leadership stuff, especially as it relates to F-16s. Anything you want to keep asking in that current vein? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm just gonna let me pull something out of the hat real quick. I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. I just see you leaning on the mic, and I'm like, wait, stop! Don't ask a question because I want to talk about planes, man.
Parker, stop! Parker, shut up! Parker, shut up! Yeah, that's mainly like that's how Sweb and I sometimes we're like okay, you go, I go, and it's unspoken. Like we never have like a clarified.
Right.
But anyway, no, let me ask the question, Sweb, about what you want to ask him. I'm just kidding. No, you go.
Oh man. All right. So I still have my notes from February 2019. So I'm gonna lob up a couple of quotes or ideas that you've said. And I'd love to just hear you just go on them. And they're all related, of course, essentially to this anyway, because it's what you do. But
I'll be interested to hear if I agree with myself.
You do. As I'm reading through these notes, I'm like, oh yeah, he still agrees with all these. So you, Parker, I asked.
Also, send me those notes.
Oh, I'll send them to you.
I kind of want to see them.
Yeah, they're good. Well, they're also my notes. I mean, yours is longer, and I'm sure you wrote them better. But Parker, I asked John Mark to come on a call with my team back in February 2019. I used to do these weekly or every other week call, and I'd say, hey, who's an expert out there in something that can come in and teach my team something? So John Mark put a list, 5 things I learned in the F-16 I can apply to ministry is ultimately what we're talking about. But a couple of things that stick out to me that we're kind of talking about now. You multiple times talked about, you have the word max in my notes, max 3 different times, and they're hyphenated. You talked about, you need to know how to max perform your aircraft. I love that phrase. You also later on, and I can't wait to get to this topic, but do the first one first. You said a little bit of cockiness is okay. And then right underneath that, because you can't max perform without max belief. And I in my mind, I can kind of see how this all relates to this hard work thing, but I just want you to talk about the idea of max.
I said that?
You did, and it's brilliant because I'm seeing you after watching Tom Cruise try to be a pilot the other day. I'm like, man, John Mark's really the pilot here, man. So like, I'm picturing you in this F-16 turning way tighter than they're doing in those cute little F-18s. So I'm just curious what you mean by the max perform your aircraft. Again, apply that to life and how you're even applying that to this topic. Again, I know I told you I'm just throwing this at you without any heads up, but I just love that phrase.
Yeah. Well, I think, that's a.
Because you said, here's the actual quote, by the way. Let me just read the actual quote that I wrote down. You said you have to know how to run it better than anyone else in order to max perform. And I love that. I do think people sandbag. I think people leave a lot on the table with different things, especially as it relates to hard work. I'm the guy that settles, man. I'm like, where's my C average? Because I can still dominate a lot of people at a C average. But I don't feel like that's what you do. And you obviously are using this in the context of a few years ago when I asked you that. You're using it in terms of an industry or a job. You can't mail it in. Your plane specifically wants to fall out of the sky. So, I don't know. How are you max performing? Do you still keep that mindset, or is this an old teaching because now you're older, your kids are older, you're like, screw it?
No, I definitely, I think that's one thing. Like, I don't ever want to get to a point in this life where I'm like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
Or I don't have to work as hard. My great grandfather was a farmer, and until he lived into his mid 90s and born in 1895. Like, just that always baffles me. And he, until the end of his life, was like up at 4 a.m. Like didn't go to an office, but like he literally was pushing himself. Now, that's the whole max perform thing and the work thing. Like he was pushing himself all his entire life, all day long until he went to bed. And so he was, every day was an 18-hour day for him. Jeez. And then, he's in the South, so Sunday was Sabbath. But you can't max perform without max belief. I think it's, for one thing, knowing, just it goes back to Parker's question about, having grace, understanding that not everybody has the same plate size. But I think, like, you probably have a bigger plate size than you realize. You know, you probably have, and that's the whole max perform thing. You know, you don't know until you go to the edge of the envelope.
Yeah.
You know, you don't know until you go. And this goes back to the whole, like, you know, seeing the value in pushing yourself, in doing something really hard. You know, going back to pilot training, I would not have known that was in me until I did it.
That's right.
And that was kind of that was even my mindset when I was going through pilot training, or when I was going through ROTC in college. I got into ROTC just so I didn't have student loans.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't, I didn't have some dream to be, you know, a fighter pilot or anything like that. It was like, I like the idea of not having a bunch, you know, 6-figure college debt. And it was like, yeah, you got to go into the military. Okay. You know, my dad was pretty strict, so I probably can handle that. You know, it's like a guaranteed job out of college. So I did that. And at every step along the way, they were like, hey, you probably would qualify if you wanted to go for a pilot slot. It's like, I would regret not having gone for it. So I'll go for it.
Yeah.
And then, you know, got into pilot training, and it was like, hey, you have the opportunity to take the fighter track. Well, I would regret not having tried.
Totally.
So I'm going to go for it. And every step along, it's like, okay, now you could actually fly, you know, not just bombers, you could fly, you know, you could pick fighters. And at the time it was F-15 or F-16. And I was like, okay, I'll try for the fighter track, and not just fighters and bombers. And every step along the way, it was like, the opportunity was presented to do something hard. It was like, okay, I'll take that. And so I didn't have anything articulated back then as far as like a strategy or a plan. It was just every step along the way, not being afraid to take that next step to do something hard. And so I think that's a big thing is the max belief, the max perform is not being afraid of something that's ahead of you, that's really daunting and hard. And that it's like, you know, ahead of time, this is gonna push me.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing is people, to the thinkless question, people are like, I don't know, this is gonna really push me, and not leaning into that, and seeing what your limits are.
So we talked a lot about the looking ahead and knowing that something hard is coming. Another one of your statements here that brings this just maybe a new thread to pull on is you talked about situational awareness. And if you want to expand on what that is for everybody else, but situational awareness and getting ahead of the jet is what you're saying. And you got to think about where you're going, not where you are. So my question about this hard thing, a lot of people face hard things that frankly, it's hard because they're not prepared. Some things really shouldn't be as hard as they are. And they are.
Yeah.
And I think I'll use a big one that I'm sure people want to argue with me about. I don't know that parenting is as hard as a lot of people say it is, but I also became a parent at 30 where I knew how to balance a checkbook, wake up myself in the morning without an alarm clock, yada, yada. I'm not saying so if you had a baby at 21, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, you see how my preparation for that was just a little different. And so I'll just be curious to know how maybe you, and if you want to use other examples, fine, of course, but like how are you preparing yourself so that you're aware and prepared, whether it be physically, mentally, emotionally, whatever, even in finances, maybe you have some margin that says, listen, I don't know what's coming down the pipeline. I know that things are hard in life because life is hard, but you know what? Here's what I'm doing to prepare for that so I can get ahead of the jet.
Well, margin is huge.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're always like, and my wife and I are constantly in this, not constantly, but this is something that we come back to occasionally, is like, okay, we got way too much on our calendar right now, you know, and so it's like, on one hand, working hard is good, but on the other hand, it's like, if we're doing something every single night of the week, you know, and it's like, and if we're spending every single dollar that we make, you know, like I think margin from a calendar standpoint, a financial standpoint, I start to sense it before I even like know that it's for real a thing. It's like, okay, I'm not, so like now I'm kind of talking out the other side of my mouth. Like I like to work hard, but then it's like at the very beginning of our conversation, like I also like to sit outside at night, you know, and take a walk, you know, and so I have to, even if like we just did this conference, you know, the week of, you know, it's like 100+ hour work week, whatever. Even if I'm not getting home until 11 p.m. and I've got to be up at 5 a.m., I've got to go for a little walk, just or driving home. I'm driving home with the windows down, and no music on, and just kind of, so like inserting those little moments of margin.
Yeah.
But, going back to the situational awareness thing, just kind of for context, like in the flying community, whether you're flying an F-16 or you're flying a Cessna 172, if you don't
what
have,
is that?
Cessna 172.
For all of the listeners like me here, and that's not a pilot, what's the difference between an F-16 and a Cessna 172?
About 1,000 miles an hour.
Okay.
That's a really great answer, by the
way. You're going. It's the difference between going a mile in 10 seconds or a mile in a minute.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty cool.
So, but that's the thing. You're going across the ground. In an F-16, you're going across faster than a mile in 10 seconds. But you're going across the ground, and you're heading towards your airfield that you're going to land at. Again, whether you're an F-16 or you're a Cessna 172, okay, I'm going to be at that landing approach in either 3 minutes or 30 minutes, but I need to have my plan in place for what I'm going to do before I get there. If I'm figuring out what I'm going to do when I'm there, I'm way too late.
Yeah.
And so not only because you are in the aircraft thinking ahead, but because you've done your homework before you even got in the aircraft.
Yeah.
And what the approach is. What the minimums are. Where you're going to set your throttle and set your whether it's your yoke or your stick or whatever, your trim, where you're going to set everything because you thought about it before you even got in the airplane. But then once you're in the airplane, you've got a moment to think. You're thinking ahead to that moment. You're not just like looking outside and enjoying it. People used to always ask like, "Oh, was it so much fun flying an F-16?" It's like, you really don't think about it.
Yeah.
There are very few times where you're like, "Oh, this is fun," because you're doing so much. And so I think, so that's the situational awareness thing, is being aware of, what's coming, what's around me, what are all my different inputs, whether you've got air traffic control talking in your ear and they're telling you things, or your radar is telling you things, or your instruments are telling you things, is just that awareness. But thinking ahead of where you are instead of, and I use that example all the time here. It's like, there's times here where I feel like I'm just barely holding on to the tail end of the airplane. And then there's times where I feel like I'm in the cockpit and I'm thinking ahead of it. And that's where you feel good.
Right.
Okay, I'm in the seat and I'm thinking ahead.
Right.
Yeah.
Where you feel like you're just reacting, that's where you just can't.
So
to your point, Sweb, sometimes people are in those situations because of their own making.
Yeah.
And they didn't prepare, they didn't plan ahead, they didn't utilize, they procrastinated, whatever it is,
Well, that's kind of what I was going to point out. Like, I remember in my pilot training, which was 1,000 miles an hour slower, Parker, I'm the other one, is
you're the Cessna 172.
Yeah, you have to. It's like the Flintstones. You got to get out and you got to kick your feet a little bit, and then it kind of gets into the air, and you hope the wind is going to blow like a kite. It's going to be great.
Right.
But there still are some similarities, and John Mark, of course, but a lot of people in flying, they get themselves into trouble because they get that like narrow focus on that one or two things, which at first it could be the right instrument. Problem is it's in the wrong context or the wrong use. So naturally and I can't remember what the name of that is. Maybe you can remind me. But basically they get that idea. They're too focused on the one thing rather than keeping their scan going across all their instruments.
Yep.
So, and I've never personally had that problem, but that does apply to life.
In the F-16, we called it the drool bucket. The drool bucket. I mean, like where it's like you get enamored with, one screen, and it's just like your mouth is open, you're just drooling. And
I love that phrase.
It's like, dude, look out. You've been, but it's the scan, and it's and I can't remember what it's called either, but it's like you only give yourself so many seconds on a certain thing, and then you got to move on. And it's like, it's the equivalent today of texting and driving. People, pick up their phone, they look at it, and it's like, there's not an internal clock like,
yeah,
hey, you need to be looking up.
That's right.
I'm not advocating for texting and driving, but that's why people get in trouble with it.
No, that's exactly right. And that's kind of even my point. So I feel like in life, zooming out, and again, you have commentary to this probably, but I feel like that's what happens though in life. I don't want to do hard things, but man, I know my show. I'm watching my show all the time. I focus on that one Netflix show. I got to get, hey kids, shut up. I know I could help you on your homework. Or shut up. I got the show to watch. There's whatever those things are. Everybody has those things where and I love the drill book. I've never heard that phrase, but that's what we're using a lot from now on. So, but I feel like that's what that is. And I feel like that is the thing that eats the margin that would allow you to not just be more efficient, but also endure hard things, perceive hard things. Obviously that situational awareness, because that's where that lack of situational awareness comes from, that sickness that everybody talks about, they get seasick or, air sick. I find sometimes that's true. I find a lot of times it's because they're focusing on the one thing. They're just stuck in their own mind with their own anxiety of like, is this plane going to crash? Oh my gosh, was that turbulence? And a lot of times it's just in your brain because of that you're just focusing on the wrong thing. So I just see that happen in life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think, hopefully you've got some people who listen to this who maybe aren't believers in Jesus, or this is life stuff. I do think for following Jesus, it's like at some point you realize God's faithfulness when you look back.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, it didn't. So the point of being like anxious in a moment or in the middle of something hard, it's like, that goes back to the whole, like, hey, it didn't kill me before. It didn't cause me to have a mental breakdown before. It's easy to just say it didn't kill me, but it didn't cause me to have a complete mental and emotional breakdown before. It didn't cause me to have a complete anxiety attack or panic attack before. So I say that with all full respect for the fact that mental health is a very real thing.
Yeah.
And it is, I have walked through, I don't personally deal with the high levels of treatable or needing to be treated anxiety or anything like that, but I've walked through it firsthand personally with multiple people, and I know that it is a real thing. It's not just like you need to think positive thoughts and pray more. Definitely not that. So that's a real thing for sure. And but even I can speak specifically about one person who I'm very close with. I'm not going to say specifically, who has gone through a very hard mental, emotional anxiety season. And then when those seasons start to come up again, that person has told me specifically, like, I now know that in that season, the first time it happened, I legitimately questioned whether I was going to be able to survive it. And now I know that I did. And so those thoughts of, am I going to die? I don't have to entertain those thoughts anymore. So there is an element, even for somebody who has a clinical treated case of anxiety, somebody saying, I still am taking captive those thoughts and telling that voice, nope, you're not going to die. And so that's the extreme side. The much more practical side is like, to your point of the singular area of focus is it's the margin. It's the realizing, okay, again, going back to this conference thing, this is not the season where we're going to catch up on, season 4 of Yellowstone. This is not the season where I'm going to be able to go on guy trips or go on hunting trips or play a lot of golf or whatever. It's like, this is the season where I'm going to cut out those fun extra things. The financial equivalent is, I'm not going to be going to Starbucks for a little bit. Is those have to have things that people.
That's right. That's really good.
So I think that's the whole, like, thinking ahead of the airplane kind of thing. It's like, okay, coming into that, I'm going to make sure that I'm taking away those extra things that I feel like sometimes, I just got to have my show or whatever, taking those away.
Yeah.
That's great.
That's super helpful. I've loved the fighter pilot analogies. and because that's not my world. I've never lived in that space. But it's so helpful. But I love Top Gun, if I'm being honest with you, John Mark.
Well, I'll gratify. I'll scratch Sweb's itch a little bit.
Okay,
that was weird.
No, let's keep that going. Man, if I was in Montana right now,
even the equivalent. I mean, but going back. Okay, I'll use that as an example. In the F-16, there are different types of missions. They call it a multi-role fighter, and so it can fly air to air. It can fly air to ground. So air to air is like dogfighting. Air to ground is dropping bombs. It can fly close air support, and so it's helping the troops who are on the ground. So there's all these different missions, and depending on the mission or the type of mission depends on how many different things mentally you can be doing while you're flying the aircraft. And so if you are in a close-in dogfight, where you are flying against another aircraft, that's not the time where you're checking your radar, down in the drool bucket, looking at, okay, well, what's my altitude, or what's my distance to the next airfield, or what's my landing approach going to look like? It's like, no, my eyes are outside. I'm honestly not even looking at any instruments. I am only looking at that other aircraft so that he doesn't get an advantage on me and kill me. And so that's a scenario that goes back to the whole, okay, are you in this season of final exams for your thesis or whatever? It's like, okay, that's the season where I'm going to take out all the extra things, because this requires my entire focus. And so air to air, but now if it's an air to ground mission and I'm flying in formation, if I'm flying in formation with another airplane and we're only 3 foot wingtip clearance because we're in the clouds or whatever, again, I'm not looking down at my instruments. I'm watching my flight lead, and I'm 100% focused on him. But if we're further apart and we're a mile away from each other, they call that a tactical formation. So now you can employ your airplane as a weapon, and you don't have to focus as much on. And now it's more of that cross check. It's like, okay, check on him, check out in the air, check on my instruments, check on my radar, check on my bombs, and then go back and do that again.
Yeah.
And so it depends on it's knowing which scenario you're in. That's the application.
That's good.
for the fighter pilot.
No, that makes tons of sense. That's really good.
Yeah, that's great.
Right. Go ahead, Parker.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, like I said, my fighter pilot, experience is very, very, very surface. Mainly, I shaved my stash into a mustache right after Top Gun because I just felt like it felt right.
Perfect.
It just felt right.
It looked good.
Oh,
it looked good.
Thank you. Yeah. I need to clean it up a little bit. But that's all right. I'll get to that later. But all right. I think we do kind of need a wind down here a little bit. But we Sweb, I don't know if you have just some quick hitters of anything for John Mark, but if you want to close this down too, feel free.
Well, I was just going to say, is there something we didn't ask you that you really is a soapbox of yours right now? You lead people, like you said, a multi-generational church. Of course, you're doing dynamic church. You're obviously Pastor Levi has a nationwide, of course, minimum, but a worldwide platform. So you have some sort of eyes on you and what you guys do, but you're also in Montana. So your church isn't running 20,000 people on a Sunday. So so that's just another context. You don't have to speak to that, but that's just another context you live in. And so I'm just wondering, we have a few more minutes. Is there something we didn't ask you that you feel like super relevant based on the things you see, knowing that our audience, I didn't tell you this up front necessarily, but our audience is people like us, man. Most of them are working at a church, maybe leading at a higher level of the church. They think a little bit more than other people do. So again, feel free to take it where you want. I just feel like you're full of wisdom and experience, and there's probably something we didn't ask you, or obviously we didn't have time to. So just speak to it if you wanted to.
Again, this goes back to my imposter syndrome a little bit. Dude, why am I here? I don't know. Because there's a lot of way smarter people than me out there. I mean, I feel like, we're that one of the things that's sort of a recurring theme. And Sweb, you said this to me years ago. where I was at Fresh Life and you were at Elevation, and I made a comment to you along the lines of like, man, I just wish we were a little bit more established in our systems and our kind of in our organization and the processes and all that. And you were like, man, don't be careful kind of what you're asking for a little bit. You guys are, he said, I equate it to like, we're sort of like the big church. We're at Gold Gym and we're doing lifting weights and working on our form and bodybuilding and all that. And you guys are like the CrossFitters, in a garage flipping tires over.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, there's a little bit of, he's like, there's probably a little bit of us that you guys need to get, but there's a lot of you that we need to get to.
That's right.
And so I think, the thing that I'm, everybody's obviously still not where they were pre-COVID, and that's probably never going to be, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Is just understanding, okay, it's not a bad thing that the church has changed, and probably the way we were doing it needed to change anyway.
Yeah.
And so I think to not worry so much about that, and the thing that's exciting right now is it is an opportunity to feel a little bit, to lean into being a little bit scrappy, and to lean into an entrepreneurial spirit.
That's good.
And so like that's something that we've even always tried to say is like, let's not ever feel like we've arrived, and let's not ever feel like we've got this figured out. We can take our foot off the gas. Let's always feel like we're a startup. And let's always feel like we're, like year one. And it's easier said than done. And it sounds, all glamorous, but I think the way we've done that is like, this is an example, is this conference is like, we're gonna always err on the side of doing things that are a little bit harder.
Yeah, that's
and
good.
There now, I'm bringing it back full circle, a little bit harder than we think we're able to do.
Yeah,